Order, please. The subject matter for late debate has been chosen. Therefore, be it resolved that the NDP has repeatedly chosen Nova Scotia Power shareholders over ratepayers, supports ratepayers funding the bonuses of executives, and have become the defenders of big business in Nova Scotia, following the tradition of successive Conservative governments in Nova Scotia. Submitted by the honourable member for Yarmouth. Daily routine, presenting and reading petitions. The honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I beg leave to table a petition, the operative clause being we, the undersigned, are community members who are requesting that the provincial government be committed to keeping the Nova Scotia Community College Sport and Wellness Centre open to the community for fitness and well-being programs that are currently offered to the public. We are the users of the Sport and Wellness Centre facilities, taxpayers, and concerned citizens of Truro, Bible Hill, and Colchester County. I have affixed my name to that along with 237 other residents.
The petition is tabled. The honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I beg leave to table a petition with the operative clause reading, we the undersigned are calling, excuse me, we the undersigned are calling upon the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal to stop the plans to change our zoning with regards to snow removal and road handling of our area and have it switched to the County of Lunenburg and leave it in the capable hands of the Department of Transportation staff in Hants West.
Petition is tabled. Presenting reports of committees. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Law Amendments Committee, I am directed to report that the committee has met and considered the following bills. Bill number 1, an act to respect the statutes of the artist. Bill number 9, an act to amend Chapter 3 of the Act of 1987, the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Resource Accord implementation. Bill 11, an act to amend Chapter 13 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Nova Scotia Tartan Act. Bill number 20, an act to amend Chapter 379 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Public Trustee Act. Bill number 22, an act respecting the licensing and qualifications and practice standards for mortgage lenders, mortgage brokers, mortgage brokerages, associated mortgage brokers, and mortgage administrators. And Bill number 32, an act to amend Chapter 418 of the Statute 1989, the Security Act. The committee recommends that these bills to the favor of consideration of the House without amendments.
Order these bills be referred to the Committee of the Whole House on Bills. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, as the Chairman of the Committee on Law Amendments, I am directed to report that the committee has met and considered the following bill. Bill number 24, an act to amend Chapter 381, an act of 1989, the Purchasing Management Association of Canada Act. The committee recommends this bill to the favourable consideration of the House with amendments.
Order that these bills be referred to the Committee of the Whole House on Bills. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. It is my honour to present the first annual report of Elections Nova Scotia under the new Elections Act, period April the 1st, 2011 to March 31st, 2012. The report is tabled. Thank you. Statements by ministers. Government notices of motion. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to make an introduction, if I may. I would like to ask Ms. Tilly Pelly to please rise and receive the warm welcome of this House. She's up in your gallery there. resolution I'd like to read, Mr. Speaker.
Most certainly. We welcome all our guests to the gallery and hope that they enjoy this afternoon's proceedings. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
I hereby give notice that on a future day that I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Department of Justice Legal Services Co-Executive Director Tilly Pelly was this week elected as second Vice President of the Nova Scotia Barristers Society in June, and whereas this election means that Ms. Pilley will progress to the position of first Vice President and then to President of the Barristers Society, and whereas this new position will allow Ms. Pilley to bring valuable insight and experience to the Society in a leadership role. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize Tilly Pilley's recent election to the position of second Vice President of the Nova Scotia Barristers Society and wish her all the best in her leadership role in the Barristers Society over the next 3 years. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas May 5th will mark the International Day of the Midwife, which is recognized in 70 countries around the world since 1992. And whereas midwives have been providing care to birthing women in every corner of the globe for at least a century. And whereas this is an opportunity to pay tribute to the dedicated and compassionate work of midwives and all those who are recipients of their care, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House recognize International Day of the Midwife and acknowledge their role in providing quality care to Nova Scotians. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Nova Scotia Agricultural College has an international reputation for educating students who are making a positive impact on some of the world's biggest challenges, including food, water, and the environment. And whereas 87% of NSAC graduates are living in and contributing to the success of Atlantic Canada. And whereas on Friday, May 4th, the NSAC will celebrate its students' achievement for 2012 at the 107th NSAC Convocation Ceremony. Therefore, be resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate NSAC's class of 2012 for their accomplishments and hard work and wish them luck with all their future endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver, notice, and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your indulgence, I would like to read this resolution on behalf of my colleague, the Minister of Education. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Tri-County Regional School Board and Digby Schools Plus, in partnership with the Nova Scotia Newcomer Navigator Initiative, are hosting the Digby County Welcome Heritage and Diversity event on May 4th, 2012. And whereas the event's performances are meant to expose youth to heritage, diversity, and cultural opportunities, as well as to help develop a mentorship program for youth in the county. And whereas the new Digby Schools Plus site is an excellent addition to the community and will help students succeed, therefore be it resolved that all members of the House of Assembly acknowledge the Tri-County Regional School Board and Digby Schools Plus for working to expand options for youth in Digby County. And Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Am I permitted to do an introduction?
Most certainly.
Thank you. I'd like to draw members' attention to your gallery, Mr. Speaker, where we're joined today by Mr. James McNutt, QC. Mr. McNutt is championing an application to have both this House and Province House in Charlottetown recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and which I'm about to read a resolution for. Members will also know that Mr. McNutt is the author of Building for Democracy, a book about the history and architecture of the 3 legislative buildings in the Maritimes. So I ask all members to give a warm welcome to our guest today.
Thank you. We welcome all our guests to the gallery and hope that they enjoy this afternoon's proceedings. I will now recognize the Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Nova Scotia House of Assembly, established in 1758, has been in continuous service to its electorate for more than 250 years, is recognized as the oldest legislature in the Westminster system of government outside Great Britain and has conducted its business in Province House since 1819. Whereas Province House was constructed in the British neoclassical style and is acknowledged to be one of the finest examples of that style in North America. And whereas Province House has been the setting for numerous legal, cultural, and political events having international significance, including the establishment of freedom of the press in Canada, the swearing in of 4 Governor-Generals of Canada, the second meeting of the Fathers of Confederation, which ultimately led to the creation of Canada as an independent country, and numerous events of significance in the military and political life and defense of its allies in World War I and World War II. Therefore, be it resolved that Nova Scotia House of Assembly believe its seat, Province House, is deserving of the designation as World Heritage Site by the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, and believe it meets various of the criteria prescribed by UNESCO for the designation, and those reasons hereby request the designation by UNESCO, which the Assembly would consider an honour. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I beg leave to read this resolution on behalf of my colleague, the Minister of Education. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Progress Magazine held its first annual Innovation in Practice World Cafe and awards to showcase, promote, and award innovation in the public sector on April 26 at the Nova Scotia Community College Waterfront Campus. And whereas the Nova Scotia Virtual School is an innovative approach to teaching and learning in the 21st century to provide high school students with more learning opportunities in their own communities, and is a joint project between school boards and the Department of Education. And whereas this online learning center was recognized as one of 4 finalists by Progress Magazine in the education category for achieving excellence in sustainable innovation practices. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House of Assembly recognize and acknowledge the efforts of all those involved in making the Nova Scotia Virtual Schools an innovative and effective tool of 21st century teaching and learning, regardless of geography. And Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas James W. McNutt, QC, is the former Legislative Counsel and Law Clerk of the province of Prince Edward Island's legislature. Whereas Mr. McNutt is the author of a number of books on historical architecture, including Building for Democracy, The History and Architecture of the Legislative Buildings of Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and New Brunswick. And whereas Mr. McNutt is promoting recognition of our Province House as a World Heritage Site by the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organizations, UNESCO, therefore be it resolved that the Nova Scotia House of Assembly offers its sincere thanks to James W. McNutt for all that he has done and continues to do for Province House. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Thank you. Introduction of bills. The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table a bill entitled An Act to Improve Patient Safety and Health Systems Accountability.
The Honourable Minister for Health and Wellness begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Improve Patient Safety and Health Systems Accountability.
Bill number 74, entitled An Act to Improve Patient Safety and Health Systems Accountability.
Order the bill be read a second time on a future day. I will now recognize the Honourable Member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Provide Greater Flexibility for Nova Scotians' Retirement Savings in Locked-In Accounts.
The Honourable Member for Inverness begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Provide Greater Flexibility for Nova Scotians' Retirement Savings in Locked-In Accounts.
Bill number 75, entitled An Act to Provide Greater Flexibility for Nova Scotians' Retirement Savings in Locked-In Accounts.
Order the bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 41 of the Acts of 2010, the Personal Health Information Act.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 41 of the Acts of 2010, the Personal Health Information Act.
Bill number 76, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 41 of the Acts of 2010, the Personal Health Information Act.
Order the bill be read a second time on a future day. I will now recognize the Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 12 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Medical Society Act.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 12 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Medical Society Act.
Bill number 77, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 12 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Medical Society Act.
Order the bill be read a second time on a future day. Notices of motion. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas today marks the launch of the African-Centric Learning Institute, And whereas this long-awaited first-class institute is a result of hard work by members of the community, including the Council of African Canadian Education and Partners, with the Department of with the Department of Education and many other educational partners. And whereas the African-centric Learning Institute is a great asset to our province, enriching our communities by providing policy analysis and African-centric educational research. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House of Assembly congratulate the Council of African Canadian Education and the education partners on this great achievement, and thank all of those involved with the development of the African-centric Learning Institute for their commitment to the community and dedication to enriching education in our province. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if I might be permitted to do an introduction.
Most certainly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the East Gallery this afternoon, we have representatives of the Grandparents' Rights Group, and I'd like to introduce just a couple of them at this time. Where are they at?
They're there somewhere. They're there.
I think Sally Brown is up there somewhere. Okay, and Pauline Glenn. Pauline and Sally are executive members of the Grandparents' Rights Group, Mr. Speaker, and they are joined by other members, and I would ask if they would stand and receive the warm welcome.
We welcome all our guests to the gallery and hope that they enjoy this afternoon's proceedings. I will now recognize the honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the relationship between grandparent and grandchild is an important one that allows family traditions and ideas to be passed between generations. And whereas last April, the Minister of Justice said in this House that there's nothing richer in his life than the experience and relationship he has with his granddaughter, and the love, the security, and friendship is something that he cherishes and he wishes to have till the day he leaves the world. And whereas a group of Nova Scotia grandparents do not enjoy the love, security, and friendship of their grandchildren because of a breakdown in their family unit, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly urge the NDP government to take concrete steps that will allow grandparents and their grandchildren to enjoy the kind of warm, mutually beneficial relationship the Minister of Justice has with his granddaughter. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. The request for waiver, is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax, Citadel, Sable Island.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I read this resolution, I would like to make an introduction.
Certainly.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, in the East Gallery today are 6 distinguished members of my constituency. They're here from Armbray Academy to celebrate the 125th anniversary of Armbray Academy. Armbray, as you know, Madam Speaker, was formed by Anna Leonemans and some prominent members of Nova Scotia community, Mr. Speaker, and 125 years ago. Sorry, Madam Speaker, I get used to the Mr. Speaker. It's just, guess if you occupy the chair long enough, it's hard to tell the difference, Mr. Speaker. I will go ahead nonetheless, Mr. Speaker. Armbray Academy has been at the forefront of the struggle for particularly the education of girls and women 125 years ago, Mr. Speaker. So I want to introduce them by name. Matea Caccione, Zachary Novak, Stefan Jukes, I Gilmore, I may have mispronounced that, Max Alwyn, and they're here accompanied by their headmaster, Gary O'Mara. I'd like to have them rise and receive the warm welcome of this House.
We welcome all our guests to the gallery and hope that they enjoy this afternoon's proceedings. I will now recognize the honourable member for Halifax, Citadel, Sable Island.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Armbrey Academy is an independent, not-for-profit, close-knit educational community that prepares students from preschool through grade 12 to be critical thinkers, lifelong learners, and engaged citizens. Whereas Armbrey Academy was originally incorporated as the Halifax Ladies College through an act of the Nova Scotia Legislature on May 3rd, 1887, and whereas on May 3rd, 2012, Armbrey Academy celebrates its 125th anniversary of promoting excellence, trust, integrity, fairness, and compassion through a proven academic program and small class sizes, supported by Headmaster Gary O'Meara and a dedicated group of staff and faculty. Therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly recognizes the 125th anniversary of the legislation incorporating the Halifax Ladies College, now Armbrey Academy. Thanks Armbrey Academy for 125 years of excellence in education, and extends best wishes to all faculty, staff, and students for continued success. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Jim Stanley has been principal at the Nova Scotia Community College Annapolis Valley campus for the past 7 years, guiding the school to its sound place among our post-secondary institutions. And whereas Jim served on the Annapolis-Digby Economic Development Agency Board and was on the Socio-Economic Committee with the Fundy Energy Research Network and was described in the Annapolis County Spectator as a veteran of community development. And whereas Jim also had careers with the Nova Scotia Office of Economic Development and the Nova Scotia Teachers College, a place that still holds the highest personal and professional regard in his long and distinguished career. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly acknowledge his record of achievement, leadership, and friendship, and wish him good health in his well-deserved retirement. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas author Joyce Ellison once said, grandparents, like heroes, are as necessary to a child's growth as vitamins. And whereas a warm, caring relationship between a child and their grandparents provides benefits for the whole family. And whereas grandparents can provide grandchildren with a link to their past and a sense of belonging. Therefore, be resolved that all members of this House of Assembly extend our warm wishes to the grandparents sitting in the Legislative Gallery today and hope that they will soon have the opportunity to make the world a little softer, a little kinder, and a little warmer for their grandchildren. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Jerry and Linda Simpson for the past 5 years have been growing grapes on their 3.5-acre orchard, Cobequid Tides Vineyard in Lower Debert, Colchester North, and whereas their first commercially produced full-bodied white wine called Cobequid Tides Lac-A-Dee was debuted recently at the Masstown Market in Masstown, and whereas Cobequid Tides Lac-A-Dee has received the silver medal at the 2012 Finger Lakes International Wine Competition, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Jerry and Linda Simpson for their accomplishments and wish them continued success in the wine industry. I ask for waiver of notice, passage without debate, and I will respond to your request.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Hants West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas today's ever-expanding world of technology has overshadowed small office supply companies, which began building their business with the sale of paper clips, pens, and pencils. And whereas Rick and Judy Rockwell began their business in 1992 in Windsor by actually delivering office supplies to the doors of their customers. And whereas this year the Rockwells and their employees are celebrating the 20th anniversary of Brooklyn Office Supplies and are still applying the same old-fashioned business practices that make them so popular with their customers. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly extend our best wishes to Rick and Judy Rockwell as they celebrate the 20th anniversary of Brooklyn Office Supplies and wish them many more years of success. Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Lake Loon Cherrybrook Seniors Citizens Group was formed approximately 35 years ago with Elizabeth Johnson as their first president and Eliza Johnson as coordinator and a group of 25 to 30 people meeting at the Cherrybrook Community Centre. Whereas the group is still active and has accomplished much in their time together, such as publishing a book, living libraries, quilt making, fundraising for the Black Cultural Centre, awarding a youth scholarship for a student from their community attending university, as well as forming offshoot of the club named the Cherrybrook Slowpokes Walking Group, amplifying their goal of bringing good health to seniors of their community. Whereas Elma Johnson has been president since 1999 and has been active in the organization Literacy Skills Group, dinners and trips. Therefore, be resolved that the members of this House recognize the Lake Loon Cherrybrook Senior Citizens Group for their hard work and dedication over the past 35 years and wish them many more years of success. And Mr. Speaker, to ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Jennifer Jesty, former resident of North Sydney, is the only Canadian serving on the International Fire Relief Mission Fire Board of Advisors. But first, or nothing new for Jennifer, who was the first Aboriginal woman to graduate from a paramedic program in Pittsburgh, the first Aboriginal woman to become a member of the Nova Scotia Firefighters Association, and the first Canadian member of the Board of Trustees for the International Association of Women in Fire and Emergency Services. And whereas Jennifer is presently working as an advanced care paramedic for the Canadian Industrial Paramedics in Jocelyn Creek near Fort McMurray, Alberta. And whereas the International Fire Relief Mission collects used, serviceable fire and EMS equipment from American and Canadian fire departments and sends that gear to developing and war-torn countries, along with teams that distribute and provide demonstrations on proper use of the equipment. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Jennifer Jesty for her dedication and humanitarian service and wish her continued success. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Argyle.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Une date ultérieure, je demande l'adoption de la résolution suivante. Attendu que le vendredi 27 janvier 2012, le regroupement des aînés et aînées de la Nouvelle-Écosse a présenté des certificats de reconnaissance 2011 pour la région d'Argyle à Armand Bourque, Adeline d'Entremont, Francis Corporan et Sylvester Corporan. Et attendu que Armand Bourque a été nominé par le club indien Sluice Seniors, Adeline d'Entremont des Nouveaux Horizons de la Baronnie, Francis Corporan et Sylvester Corporan par le club des seniors de Acadia Seniors de Wedgeport. Et attendu que chaque année, lors de l'Assemblée générale annuelle, la RAN souligne la contribution exceptionnelle d'un aîné ou d'un aîné qui mérite un certificat de reconnaissance régionale. Par conséquent, que soit résolu que tous les membres de cette Assemblée félicitent Armand Bourque, Adeline d'Entremont, Francis Corporan et Sylvester Corporan pour leur dévouement à leur communauté. Monsieur le Président, je demande l'adoption de cette résolution sans préavis et sans débat. In English, I hereby give notice on future days to move the adoption of the following resolution, whereas on Friday, January 27, 2012, the Regroupement des aînés et aînées de la Nouvelle-Écosse, or the RAN, recognized Armand Bourque, Adeline d'Entremont, Francis Corporan, and Sylvester Corporan from the Argyle region for their contribution in the year 2011. And whereas Armagh Burke was nominated by the Indian Sluice Seniors Club, Adeline Dontram was nominated by the New Horizons of the Barony of West Pubnico, Francis Corcoran and Sylvester Corcoran were both nominated by the Acadian Seniors Club of Wedgeport. And whereas at their annual general meeting of the RAN recognizes seniors who have contributed to their clubs. Therefore be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Armagh Burke, Adeline Dontram, Francis Corcoran, and Sylvester Corcoran for dedicating their time and talents to their community. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas since 2009, 2F by Sea Cafe has been a popular downtown Dartmouth destination known for their mouth-watering baked goods. And whereas Tibbs, as it's known by many, has partnered with Chef René Lavalier to create the Tibbs family dinners to promote local ingredients and alternatives to fine dining. And whereas Tibbs helped create the I Love Dartmouth campaign, fostering pride in their community, and on the anniversary of their opening won a Halifax Fusion Innovation Award. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House of Assembly congratulate Ms. Tara McDonald and Mr. Zane Kelsell, co-owners of 2F by Sea, on their success in Dartmouth on their opening of the unofficial Dartmouth Embassy in Halifax's historic properties, teaching everyone on this side of the harbour that there are many reasons to love Dartmouth. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Hants West.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Windsor Forks Grade 6 elementary school teacher Melissa Greeno is a remarkable and caring teacher to all of her students. And whereas Melissa Greeno went above and beyond the call of duty of any teacher by ensuring that all her students have the necessary warm clothing and footwear each winter, while preparing her students to be leaders in the school and the community. And whereas this remarkable leadership also saw Melissa organize a Hearts for Haiti presentation and fundraiser, and resulted in the Windsor Forks teacher receiving a Nova Scotia Education Week Award on April 23, 2012. Therefore be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly extend sincere congratulations to Melissa Greeno for showing so many of her students her warm and caring ways, and wish her every possible future success. And Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas several Yarmouth residents recently competed at the Provincial Candlepin Youth Bowling Championships, and whereas Yarmouth's Cody Bork, Will Kroll, Jesse Gallagher, Cameron George, Briar Cunningham, Robbie Kroll, Cameron Smith, Tyler Wyman, and Shaylin Smith won either silver or gold at the Provincial Candlepin Youth Bowling Championships. And whereas Cody Burke, Will Kroll, Jesse Gallagher, Cameron George, Briar Cunningham, Robbie Kroll, Cameron Smith, Tyler Wyman, and Shaylin Smith will now compete at the Candlepin Youth Bowling Nationals being held in Fredericton, New Brunswick on May 5th. Therefore, it be resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate these young bowlers on their recent provincial success and wish them luck as they compete at the national level. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Cape Smoky Storm and North Highlands Huskies girls basketball team came together to form a representative team to attend a tournament held at Cape Breton University, hosted by the Riverview Sonics rep team in March. And whereas coaches Jenny and Stanley Symes and assistant coach Tony Whitty and the team worked very hard to prepare themselves to compete. And whereas preparation, teamwork, and dedication enabled them to bring home a silver medal. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly applaud and congratulate coaches Jenny and Stanley Symes, assistant coach Tony Whitty, team players Cassidy Best, Olivia Symes, Brianna Lynn Ferguson, Drew McDonald, Tia Fricker McNeil, Joni Whitty, Jade Wilkie, Brianna McKinnon, Megan McClellan, Sherilyn McClellan, and Bailey Yusufer on their success and wish them the best in the future. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Off the Hook, a Digby longline fishing co-op, have caught a big prize from the Solution Search Contest. And whereas Off the Hook was runner-up in the International Sustainable Fisheries Contest, sponsored in part by National Geographic. And whereas Off the Hook sells shares of or subscriptions at the beginning of the summer and then delivers the fresh, fair fish to customers in the Valley, Halifax, and across the province. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of this House congratulate Off the Hook for their creative way in helping sustain the fishing industry in their most impressive award in this contest. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver, notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice and on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas close to 300 children are registered for the Leah Degas Memorial Kids Against Cancer Hockey Tournament held yearly in Sydney Mines. And whereas the tournament was renamed in honour of Leah, who served as the tournament princess until she lost her battle with cancer at 9 years of age. And whereas tournament organizer Joey Boner said the goal of the tournament is to raise awareness and funds for cancer research and to allow kids to have fun on and off the ice, with all profits going to the Sydney Mines unit of the Canadian Cancer Society. Therefore be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate the Army of Volunteers who make this annual tournament a reality and thank them for all their work they do in the fight against cancer. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Mr. Thomas Simmons celebrated his 100th birthday on April 12, 2012, and where Mr. Simmons was born and raised in the community of North Preston, where he and his wife, Eunice, raised 15 children, and where he still resides today in his own home, continuing to do many of his own repairs. Whereas Mr. Simmons worked for the City of Dartmouth until retirement age of 65, providing excellent service to the residents of the area. Therefore be resolved, the members of this House recognize Mr. Thomas Simmons for 100th birthday and extend congratulations and best wishes to this very remarkable man. And Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for waiver, notice, and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas John Russell from Sydney River is preparing to take a walk down memory lane at the Montreal Shriners Hospital for Children, a place that ensured such a journey was possible. And whereas John Russell first went to the Shriners Hospital when he was just 6 years old with serious leg and hip problems, but went on to become an iron worker and used his legs to climb some of the highest structures across the country. And whereas John's return to the hospital this month will be a chance for him to say thank you for the treatment that helped him go on to live such an active life. Therefore, be resolved that all members of this House of Assembly wish John Russell the best as he prepares to thank everyone at the Shriners Hospital and wish him success with all his help that he now gives to the Shriners. And Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas rural Nova Scotians for many years have depended on the members of volunteer fire brigades to keep their families and properties safe from fire, and whereas training, fundraising, first aid, recruitment, and public relations are only a few of the many additional responsibilities of the members of the brigade, and whereas firefighters seldom receive the accolades which they deserve, but most fire brigades hold a banquet each year to thank members and to present special honors, Therefore, be it resolved, all members of the House of Assembly congratulate Shane Slack of the DeBert Fire Brigade, Colchester North, for receiving the Fire Officer of the Year Award. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Oh. There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville on the introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'm proud to stand in my place today to introduce two very important women in my life. My wife, Charlotte, and my daughter, Morgan, are here visiting the House today. So I'd ask them to please rise and receive a warm welcome to the House.
We welcome all our guests to the gallery and hope that they enjoyed today's proceedings. The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Nova Scotian Sylvia Hamilton was named a WAVE Award winner at Women Making Waves 2012, the second annual Women in Film and Television Atlantic Conference in March 2012. And whereas Dr. Hamilton is a multi-award winning Halifax-based filmmaker, writer, and educator known for her documentaries exploring the history and experience of African Canadians. And whereas Dr. Hamilton holds the Rogers Chair in Communications at University of King's College and previously held a distinguished chair in Women's Studies at Mount St. Vincent University, and also co-created New Initiatives in Film, a program for women of color and First Nations women when she worked with the National Film Board's Studio D. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate Sylvia Hamilton on her latest award for her creativity and leadership and encourage her continued contribution to the film, television, and digital media industry. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 9-year-old Digby resident Lewis Riley is Nova Scotia's second best free thrower, and whereas Lewis earned this title at the Knights of Columbus Provincial Free Throw Championships held in Truro on March the 17th, and whereas this free throw event challenge requires both focus and discipline, something that Lewis has proven he possesses. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of the House congratulate Lewis Riley on his impressive title and wish him all the best in future challenges. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas since arriving in Halifax 23 years ago, Felicia Egan has made tremendous contributions to the Clayton Park and HRM communities as a passionate volunteer and respected community leader. And whereas Miss Egan founded the African Diaspora Association of the Maritimes in 2005, an organization that developed out of Miss Egan's important work in the community as a mentor for immigrant parents. And whereas Ms. Egan's volunteerism and passion for issues relating to health and immigration goes beyond her essential work with ADAM, including work with the Advisory Council of the Status of Women, the Council of African Canadian Educators, the HIV/AIDS Coalition of Nova Scotia, the Health Association of African Canadians, and Mount St. Vincent University, and many others. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House of Assembly join me in recognizing Felicia Egan as a respected and significant pillar of the Halifax community and applaud her work in these important areas. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Caitlin Morton of Berwick was recently named Mount Allison's top student athlete And whereas Caitlin has wrapped up 4 years as a student and women's hockey player and is planning to attend law school, and whereas Caitlin is proud to have been recognized for both her athletic and academic achievements while at Mount A. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly recognize and congratulate Caitlin Morton of Berwick and wish her every success in her future endeavors. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Glen Haven resident Jan Miller was named a WAVE Award winner at Women Making Waves 2012, the second annual Women in Film and Television Atlantic Conference in March 2012, and whereas Jan Miller is president of Lowenby Holdings, Director of Strategic Partners, the co-production market of the Atlantic Film Festival, and Chair of Women in Film and Television, WIFT Atlantic, to name but a few of her accomplishments. And whereas Ms. Miller is an internationally renowned pitching consultant who has taught writers and producers around the world how to develop and market their projects, thus opening the doors for many new producers. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate Jan Miller on her latest award for her creativity and leadership and encourage her continued contribution to the film, television, and digital media industry. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Orders of the day. Before I go to oral questions put by the ministers, I don't think I have to remind anybody today about the use of Blackberries or laptops. So the time now is 1:06, and it's oral questions put by members to ministers. I will now recognize the honourable leader of the official opposition.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a conflict of interest occurs when your obligations to a party or the greater public could be influenced or compromised by self-interest or prior commitment, competing loyalties, or your inability to be objective. Recently, officials at the East Coast Forensic Centre declared a conflict of interest when it came to conducting an assessment of their patient, Mr. Denny. And as a result, a professional outside of our province has been tasked with the important responsibility of doing that assessment. My question to the Premier, did the Premier think the officials at the East Coast Forensic Centre did the right thing?
Honourable the Premier.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I do.
Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Speaker, Nova Scotians are still wondering what happened in the case of the death of Raymond Tavel. They believe there was a breakdown somewhere. And Mr. Speaker, they'd like to have answers and assurances that it won't happen again. However, the actions of this government placed hardworking DHA and government officials in a difficult position to investigate their own protocols and whether they were followed, and to assess, Mr. Speaker, whether they were sufficient. So my question to the Premier, if the Premier believes the officials at the East Coast Forensic Centre did the right thing, then why is it appropriate for the Department of Justice and Department of Health to investigate themselves?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the question from the Leader of the Opposition. What I'll do is ask the Minister of Health to address it specifically.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the Deputy Ministers of Health and Justice are proceeding to develop the review process, and they are looking to external outside of the province psychiatrists to conduct the review, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the more questions you ask this government, the more the different answers you get as you go along, Mr. Speaker. The people at the East Coast Forensic Unit knew at the very beginning they should be calling in outside help to investigate what had happened with this particular client, Mr. Speaker. The Department of Health and Justice seemed it fit that they investigate themselves, Mr. Speaker. We're not looking for them to go on the outside. What we're asking for the Department of Health and Justice is to step back completely and allow someone from the outside to come in and investigate this on their own and then report back to this House in an independent fashion, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, will the Premier do the right thing, just like the officials at the East Coast Forensic Unit did, Mr. Speaker, and ask for an independent review so that Nova Scotians can have faith in the results of this review?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I believe the Minister of Health just answered that question. I realize it was written before he got the answer that he didn't expect on the second supplementary, but I'll reiterate it for him. The Minister says they're looking to ensure that there is a broad review, and they're looking for a psychiatrist. They're looking... No, that's not, Mr. Speaker, with all respect. The Leader of the Opposition asked a question. He asked me to give him an answer, and that's what I'm attempting to do, but it's difficult to answer over him yelling. So what I am saying, Mr. Speaker, is that the Minister of Health has just said that there will be a psychiatrist from
Order,
outside
please.
of the...
Order, please. That is an unparliamentary remark, please, and I'd ask the honourable member to stand up and withdraw that remark. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I will withdraw that remark, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Now I will go back to the Honourable Premier for his answer. A shortened answer.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Health has just said there will be a psychiatrist employed from outside the jurisdiction to do the review.
Thank you. The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Premier. We are only 1 week from the last minute settlement with the Nova Scotia Government Employees Union Local 42, and already our health system is at risk of being thrown into chaos again. The Nova Scotia Nurses Union, which bargains for 6,000 registered nurses, licensed practical nurses, and nurse practitioners, will be back at the bargaining table this very month. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Premier, can he assure Nova Scotians today that there will be no disruption in their health service, no cancelled surgeries or other procedures as a result of this next round of bargaining?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, what I can tell Nova Scotians and the member opposite is that we will conduct negotiations in good faith, as we always do, and we will seek to have a resolve that meets all of those criteria. Of course, we don't want disruptions in the healthcare system, and that is the focus of our efforts.
Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure that nurses feel that when they're told they can always fire some of their fellow employees if their settlement is too high is negotiating in good faith. But in any event, the fact of the matter is that the nurses union want wage parity with the nurses of the NSGEU, who, as we know, got an arbitrated settlement last month of 5.1%. District health authorities have already filed their business plans, which include provision for a 1% increase. Clearly, the government is on a new collision course with the nurses union in their negotiations like they were on with the NSGEU nurses. So my question to the Premier, since he's going down the same road, how many surgeries and diagnostic tests will he allow to be cancelled this time before he comes to some last-minute deal?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the negotiations that took place recently were done so under good management. They were purposeful and predictable. They yielded a result that allows for a settlement without what we have seen in the past in the way of huge labor disruptions, Mr. Speaker. That, I believe, has always been the intention of government of any stripe, unless the member of the Conservative Party is of the opinion that the job of government is to provoke unnecessary strikes.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier may have as an objective that there's no labor disruption, but the fact of the matter is, under his approach, last month, there were 500 surgeries canceled. There were many thousands of procedures canceled. There was a real disruption among the health services of people that were not at the table. In my view, the job of a government is to look after those people first, and that is what the Premier failed to do. And in order to avoid his labor disruption, he agreed to a last-minute deal that he doesn't even know how much it's going to cost in the end to implement. Instead, he tells nurses that if it's too much, they can always lay off some of the nurses, which would not only be cruel to the nurses who think they're about to get a raise and instead get a pink slip from his government, but also cruel to the people who rely on those nurses for important health services. So my final question to the Premier is, how many nurses will lose their job to pay for the Premier's next deal?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, I have never addressed the nurses union in any regard in this respect, and you know, we want, of course, our nurses to have a good working environment. That's important to us. They are the ones who deliver the frontline healthcare services to patients. Mr. Speaker, the objective for this government is always to ensure that the services are there when and where people need them. And Mr. Speaker, I was in this House when the Conservative government forced out onto the streets, you know, thousands of nurses who tried to impose a contract and brought forward a bill that even after setting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and finally getting passed after some extraordinary demonstrations and difficulty, never could implement. And they couldn't implement it because the terms were so draconian that the nurses literally said that they were going to resign, Mr. Speaker. They were going to replace completely the collective bargaining process and dictate the terms of the contract, Mr. Speaker. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, that is not a path that we chose to go down.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the government embraced the decision to send the NSGEU negotiations to arbitration. Despite this, the Premier began issuing threats to nurses through the media, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I want to quote the Premier. You have a finite amount of money. If you have wage increases that are not supportable, then you have very few choices. End of quote, Mr. Speaker. My question to the Premier, why did the government support arbitration if it knew it would have to lay off nurses?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure what the point of the question is. The simple fact of the matter is I think if there's anything, they know, the opposition knows what I said is correct. The people of Nova Scotia know what I said was correct. The nurses union know that what I said was correct. The only complaint they have about it, Mr. Speaker, is that I said it. They know it's correct, they just don't want you to say it.
The Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, what is correct is that this government, Mr. Speaker, has cut more than $60 million from health care, Mr. Speaker. They've set records for ER closures, Mr. Speaker, and they failed to adequately address wait times, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, lo and behold, they've entered into arbitration, Mr. Speaker, with health care workers without telling them that they're going to lay them off. Mr. Speaker, that's the only thing that's correct. So, Mr. Speaker, my question to the Premier, since he didn't tell health care workers they were going to be laid off, I wanted to know if the Premier told Capital District Health Authority that if they entered into arbitration, that they would be forced to lay off health care workers.
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday, the member opposite the Leader of the Opposition likes to kind of cherry pick among the things that I said, because of course I said a lot of things with respect to this. In addition to what he quoted, Mr. Speaker, what I said was that we would support the budgets of the DHAs and that we would work with frontline healthcare workers in order to ensure that we got the savings that we required in the system. And if we could do that without staff layoffs, of course, that would be the best of all possible options.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Final. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What the Premier said, there was a finite amount of money, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, he's now saying,
Order.
Speaker, Mr.
Order,
Speaker,
please. The Honourable, order. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, now that the Premier has changed his mind once again, yesterday he says a finite amount of money, now today he's saying possibility of more money. Mr. Speaker, so what I think all Nova Scotians would like to know, particularly the Capital Healthcare workers would like to know, is the Premier prepared to add more money to the Capital Health budget to pay for the obligations that were decided by the arbitrator?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the only incoherence here is with the Leader of the Opposition's seeming belief that there is an infinite amount of money. Every time he turns around, he's going to put another $65 million into health care. He's going to put another $60 million into health. I mean, apparently he thinks there are hundreds of millions of dollars floating around that he can just distribute for free, Mr. Speaker. The simple fact of the matter is there is a finite amount of money. We are trying to prevent what happened under the Conservative government, where we have seen the generations to come chained with debt as a result of bad decision-making.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on a new question.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, at the beginning of this week, we heard the government announce they were going to be moving jobs out of HRM across rural Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of those consolidation of jobs would happen in New Waterford, Mr. Speaker, and all of us were, I think, by and large, agreed with the decision that we should be moving services closer to Nova Scotians that are going to be receiving those services. But on a question coming from the Conservative caucus yesterday, came to turn out that all those jobs, Mr. Speaker, are not leaving HRM. Some of them are coming from rural Nova Scotia, and as you would know from yesterday, some of those are coming from Kentville in the riding of Kings North, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and as you well know, there's a double-digit unemployment in the Valley. So I want to ask the Premier, I wonder if the Premier could tell me what the member from Kings North said to him after he found out he was moving jobs from his riding to the Deputy Premier's riding.
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'll table for the information of the Leader of the Opposition the press release that went out with respect to that shows exactly where the jobs were coming from and exactly how it was that these jobs were to be consolidated, and instead of consolidating them in Halifax, they went to Cape Breton, which I think is a very good decision. The member for Kings North, of course, is very happy with the great number of investments that we have made in the Kentville area, and we are going to continue to grow the economy of the valley.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, it's good to hear that the member for Kings North is happy that the Premier is taking jobs from his riding, Mr. Speaker, and putting them in the Deputy Premier's riding, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as part of that, also that consolidation, Mr. Speaker, there are jobs leaving from Amherst, Mr. Speaker, and you know the unemployment rate in Cumberland County is in double digits, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as you would know, in case not everyone heard, that the unemployment rate in Cumberland County is in double digits, Mr. Speaker. So I'm wondering if the Premier could tell this House what the member from Cumberland North said to him when he discovered that he was actually taking jobs from Amherst in his riding and moving to the Deputy Premier's riding.
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, just so I can correct the member of the opposition, the member for Kings North said no such thing with respect to any particular jobs. What he recognizes, and all members of this team recognizes, is that ensuring that systems change in order to keep pace with the needs of the clients of the system is an important thing to happen. That meant that the consolidation of those services were going to take place, as it has in 7 other provinces, Mr. Speaker. The question was, where does that consolidation take place? When the Liberals in power, they chose to put the consolidations in Halifax, and we chose to put that consolidation in New Waterford.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, all Nova Scotians are asking for is the Premier to be up front, Mr. Speaker, in the very beginning. Mr. Speaker, as a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, if he reads Hansard yesterday, even his first answer said all the jobs were coming from Dartmouth, when in fact that's wrong, Mr. Speaker. As a matter of fact, jobs are coming from backbenchers' ridings, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as you know, on this side of the House, I've said many times that the Industrial Expansion Fund provides the government an opportunity to pick winners and losers, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to know what the Premier says to the members of his backbenchers when he's now telling them he's going to pick winners and losers among the NDP members in this House.
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the job of the government is to ensure that services are delivered in the most effective way to the people of Nova Scotia. And there were numerous newspaper articles following this that demonstrated, and I'll just table just one of them, that demonstrated that the consolidation of the maintenance force program was going to take place, that it was coming from various places around the province, and that those were going to go to Cape Breton. Mr. Speaker, but the most interesting article that appeared in the paper recently with respect to that was about the member from Cape Breton South who said for 20 years he has campaigned to have the provincial government put jobs in Cape Breton. He was overruled by his own caucus, and it took this government to do it.
The Honourable Member for Argyll.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Today, the Nova Scotia's Nurses Union is speaking out against what they consider to be unsafe staffing models for collaborative emergency centres across the province. This week, the government announced that Twin Oaks CEC in Musquodoboit Harbour will staff their centre with primary care paramedic and one registered nurse, something that the Nova Scotia Nurses Union says is unsafe. According to the Nurses Union, two nurse, one paramedic staffing model would be safer and more appropriate. And in a press release, the union said this morning, the NSNU President, Janet Hazelton, said, I asked the Minister and Deputy Minister to review the staffing model established at the CEC. So my question, Mr. Speaker, through you is, what response did the Minister offer the NSNU, and did she commit to carrying on such a review, and on what timeline?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. Mr. Speaker, we have worked very hard to get the CECs opened. We've developed good standards. We've worked closely with the Nurses Union and with other bodies in doing this, including the College of Registered Nurses, our emergency care advisor, Dr. John Ross, and indeed the EHS medical oversight physician, Dr. Andrew Travis. And there have been many, many meetings. There have been a lot of excellent work done, and patient care is always our #1 concern, and I'm satisfied that all of the steps that needed to be taken have been taken, and we will continue to work with those bodies as we open more CECs around the province.
The Honourable Member for Argyll on his first supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Health and Wellness has a duty and a responsibility to ensure the highest standard of safety and care for patients in the healthcare system. But today, in the press release that Ms. Hazelton put forward, made it clear that she advised the nurses she represents working in CECs that if the workplaces do not meet safe standards, they should refuse to work in the area. This could mean patients at Musquodoboit Harbour and potentially all over Nova Scotia could be forced to go without the care they need. Given the fact that the NDP government's CEC staffing decision and misplaced priorities may be now putting patients at risk, will the minister commit to resolving the issue at Twin Oaks Centre today?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, no patient in Nova Scotia will be put at risk, particularly when we have such a strong group of healthcare providers working collaboratively, such as paramedics, emergency room physicians, and nurses in this province. And we will ensure, we do ensure, that the highest safety standards are in place for patient care. And the CEC models are an excellent model, a new collaborative kind of practice with all of our healthcare providers working in unison, Mr. Speaker. And they're working, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Argyle on his final supplementary.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. But the concern is still that in this press release today, the nurses union was very clear that they feel that the situation is not a safe one and that they will maybe ask their members not to basically show up to work, or if they don't feel that they're in a safe condition, that they would not work in that area. So I'm just wondering what the minister is going to do if she does move on with this, and whether she'll be speaking to the president of the Nova Scotia Nurses Union in order to come up with some kind of resolve.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as I indicated earlier, Mr. Speaker, I've had many meetings, and staff in our department have had many meetings with regard to the CEC model, the development of the standards of care, the protocols that need to be put in place, the training that's required, and indeed the evaluation that will be ongoing in the CECs. We have 2 CECs up and running right now. They are providing excellent care to the residents of those communities. And in fact, I'm told that the nurses who work in these models are so pleased with the model of care that they can't imagine that they hadn't been doing this before. They get to use the full scope of their practice. They get to provide better care to their patients, and we will continue to open CECs around the province that are collaborative in nature, that draw on the skills, the very important skills of all of our healthcare providers. And as I said, that includes the paramedics of this province, the nurses of this province, and the emergency room physicians of this province.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Natural Resources. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure he's aware that yesterday Resolute Forest Products share price dropped by 23%, largely as a result of a significant further collapse in the demand for pulp and paper, and particularly newsprint around the world. Just over 6 months ago, Mr. Speaker, the NDP handed $50 million to Resolute without conditions to guarantee the long-term viability of the mill, without protecting pensions of workers, and without even a guarantee to use Nova Scotia labour in the forest. None of that's in that deal. Mr. Speaker, my question for the minister is, why did the NDP hand over $50 million to the corporation without guarantees for the pensions and the use of Nova Scotia labour in the forests?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly, the forest industry has gone through some challenging times, but this government has stepped up to the plate and assisted where necessary, including with Resolute. And we're certainly working with the workers and the families and the industry. And the investment there is in the capital improvements for the company, is in the energy efficiencies, and certainly an investment in the workers and in the 2,000 jobs in Southwest Nova that are saved in that area.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East on his first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, those investments to improve the mill are improving a mill that by the end of July will have been closed 11 of the 30 weeks since the government handed them $50 million. You know, the fact is that those employees there aren't getting paid when the mill isn't working. So they've handed $50 million out without protecting the jobs, without protecting the pensions, and without ensuring Nova Scotians work in the forest. You know, it was brought up to the members of this caucus when we toured the mill by workers in that mill who are concerned about that issue. Mr. Speaker, as the minister knows, the deal also includes the potential of another $40 million. So can the Minister of Natural Resources tell us whether Resolute has approached the province about triggering the additional money in the deal?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're continuing to work with the company and with the forestry contractors in Southwest Nova Scotia. Certainly, downtime is not something that we want to see, but it's certainly not unusual in the industry across Canada at this time. There are a number of mills that have actually closed or are not open at all. There's others that have taken downtime, and we're going to continue to work in the best interest of the forest industry and of Resolute and the workers and their families in that area of our province.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on his final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the jobs they've protected are largely in position only because when they're not working, they're not getting paid. It's as simple as that. You know, the deal did not protect the pensions. It didn't protect people to ensure that people work in the forest. You know, the other thing that this deal did not do was did nothing to diversify the Liverpool economy to help grow the region and protect the region. So, Mr. Speaker, since the government was so focused on newsprint and its continued demand, could the minister please tell me what he's done to increase the demand for newsprint in the world?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly, the Resolute facility in Southwest Nova in the Liverpool area is an important component of our economy in that area. My understanding is that the pensions that the honourable member speaks about are fully funded, so I'm not sure where he's getting that information from. But anyway, forest industry is important to our economy. It's important to Southwest Nova Scotia. We're going to continue to work with the industry and the workers to make sure it's sustainable well into the future.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you will be to the Minister of Community Services. Time and time again, the Minister has told members of this House that she posted the review of Talbot House on her department's website because she received a FOIPOP from the media. April the 24th, and I quote, "We were requested through a FOIPOP which gives us an obligation because we knew that it was a FOIPOP through media." On April the 26th, the FOIPOP request was through the media. Mr. Speaker, it appears that the minister was well aware of the origin of this Freedom of Information request. So, Mr. Speaker, my question through you to the minister is this. It is customary that the minister be given the identities of those submitting FOIPOP requests and their contents. So what exactly were the discussions in her office around this request?
Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, the first time that I mentioned this in the House, I said it was a FOIPOP request and a media request. The second time, I ran those two words together, and that's why he has that impression. However, in budget estimates, I very, very clearly said it was a FOIPOP request, and separately there were media requests, and he knows that.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Mr. Speaker, on April the 26th, the same day that the minister told us that the media had sent her a FOIPOP, she told the House that her department discussed posting the review and concluded that, and I quote, "Because it was a public document and there was a request to see it, it would have been made public anyway." And I have the answer here to back that up, Mr. Speaker, and I'll table that. The minister knows full well that this was not a public document. I read the disclaimer from the review into the record of the number of times, proving that she is wrong. Yesterday, she told us that she put it on the department website on the advice of another individual, and that's in the answer that I just tabled as well. The question, Mr. Speaker, is this. The minister appears to be passing the buck. Will the minister accept responsibility for violating Section 20 of the FOIPOP Act?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
As I said before, Mr. Speaker, the member opposite from Argyle posted a review also, had a disclaimer. The disclaimers are standard disclaimers. They may have a little difference in them, but they are disclaimers. They know that. And we know that the review is an organizational review. And, you know, they just continually want to fabricate this entire story. And you know, beyond that, I don't know what their minds are thinking, but.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, if the minister had been listening yesterday, the disclaimers of those three different reports were read into the record of the House, and they are very different. The minister is placing the blame for publishing the review of Talbot House onto one of her advisors. She is clearly not familiar with the concept of ministerial responsibility. Perhaps the minister is creating a scapegoat because she knows that what she did was wrong, but she can't admit it. There are just too many examples, Mr. Speaker, of this minister's poor judgment, and now she's broken the law. Mr. Speaker, enough is enough. Will this minister finally accept the responsibility for her actions and step down?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Absolutely not, because I've done the right thing.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, my question is also for the Minister of Community Services, and it also involves Talbot House. Mr. Speaker, for 53 years, Talbot House provided critical residential addiction treatment services. Talbot House was an important resource for Cape Breton until the Minister of Community Services and her department decided that it needed to close its doors. The Minister of Community Services forced the Board of Directors to go to the police with an anonymous, unspecified complaint. A man's reputation has been dragged through the mud, and to top it off, the Department of Community Services made public their internal, biased, non-evidence-based report vilifying Talbot House and its staff. My question to the Minister, will the Minister of Community Services tell members of this House why the Department of Community Services targeted Talbot House for review?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, number one, we did not close Talbot House, as was been explained in this House over and over. The board made that decision. The board sent out a press release on February the 16th indicating that. And we did a review, because we have done reviews on other recovery houses, and that's what happens. The department does reviews often in a lot of situations. When you receive any kind of concern, it's our public duty to go forward and do a review. If you read the review, and I invite every person in Nova Scotia to read it, you will see that there is nothing personal in there. It talks about policies. It talks about staffing, it talks about professional development. That's all policies. That's not personal whatsoever.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With that answer, it doesn't alter the fact that Talbot House is closed, Mr. Speaker. Many people agree that the Minister of Community Services' attack on Talbot House was based on ideology, and that the Department of Community Services targeted Talbot House because it did not treat addictions the way the department thought it should. You know, Mr. Speaker, and you will remember Father John Webb, who founded Talbot House some 53 years ago, and he must be rolling over in his grave today to see the way this NDP government is handling Talbot House and Cape Breton. The community has seen the successes of Talbot House. The many recovering addicts who have benefited from care at Talbot House can attest to the success of the Talbot House model of treatment. The community does not want to see just the funding restored. They want to see Talbot House restored. My question to the Minister, will the Minister of Community Services restore funding of Talbot House, accept that their model of treatment works for their patients, and take steps to reopen Talbot House?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, what I'd like to do is table this. This is the press release from Talbot House, and it is expressed from the Board of Directors that they've made the decision to close Talbot House. We did not do that. It was the board's decision.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South on his final supplementary.
The fact of the matter is Talbot House is closed, Mr. Speaker. I can't emphasize that strongly enough. And the people of the area are left without an addiction centre that was very important to the people of my area and to all Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, the department and the minister made serious mistakes in the handling of Talbot House, and as a result, we have lost a successful treatment centre. Mr. Speaker, Talbot House can still be reopened. The community wants to see it reopened. People relying on its services
want to see it reopen. Will the Minister of Community Services fund Talbot House so it will continue the proven good work it has been doing for 53 years in our community?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, myself or the department have never denied the importance of the recovery services in Cape Breton. And so we have already had discussions with the board, and we're waiting for a meeting. And once again, the fact is that because the board closed it, if they can, all they have to do is read the press release, and they said they decided to close it on their own.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, during budget estimates, the Minister of Health and Wellness reported that the wait list for long-term care beds now exceeds 1,800 people. The wait list has doubled since the introduction of the continuing care strategy and increased by nearly 400 since this government took power. Investing in home care is a good thing, Mr. Speaker, but not every senior in this province can take advantage of those services. An internal report by the department entitled Removing Barriers in Accessing Long-Term Care shows that 1,162 of the people added to the wait list in 2009-2010 lived in areas with no publicly funded home care available. So my question to the Minister is, what can the Minister say to the more than 1,800 families who are struggling to care for their loved ones and get them into a long-term care facility? After working and contributing to our province their whole lives, don't these 1,800 seniors deserve better?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I know that seniors and their families want the best home care and long-term care available to them in their communities, and that's why we've opened 1,000 new long-term care beds, and that's why we are putting $20 million into home care this year to help seniors stay in their home for as long as they wish, Mr. Speaker.
On his first supplementary.
Continuing care strategy called for 832 new beds to be built by 2010. It's now 2012, and the latest accountability from the Department of Health and Wellness shows that only 618 strategy beds have been completed. In budget estimates, the Minister indicated that no new beds will be tendered this year and likely none next year. People in the areas of this province are waiting up to 400 days to be placed in a nursing home and up to 4 months for home care. This puts incredible stress on family members. My question to the Minister is, how long does the Minister of Health think it's appropriate for a family to wait? And can she tell Nova Scotians 400 days is okay?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for the question. I was in Cape Breton not that long ago, and I had an opportunity to speak with John Malcolm, the CEO of the District Health Authority, and he was telling me that the devolution of long-term care to the DHAs has resulted in much faster placement for people from the District Health Authority into long-term care. We're seeing great improvements. I want to tell the members that the long-term care sector has signed service agreements with all the DHAs all over the province. This is something that governments in this province have been working for more than 10 years, but unable to achieve, Mr. Speaker, but our government has been able to achieve that.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton North on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia has the oldest population in Canada, and the number of seniors in Nova Scotia is growing. By 2036, the number of Nova Scotians over 85 is expected to have doubled. But this government is doing very little to prepare, Mr. Speaker. They have done a lot of ribbon cutting on new beds and facilities tendered before they became power. They haven't finished the beds. They're already 2 years late, and they haven't released any plans for the second phase of the strategy. My question, this government has given us no confidence that they intend to look out for seniors. They are dragging their feet, and it's not only affecting seniors, but entire families. When will they commit to tendering new beds and put families at ease?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, this government has done more for seniors in the 3 short years we've been in government. And if that member would like a litany of what the programs are that we've introduced, I'd take him through that litany very easily, Mr. Speaker. We've put paramedics into long-term care so that seniors don't have to go to the emergency department, Mr. Speaker, and we're recognized across Canada as being a leader in the best practices in that regard, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we introduced a caregiver's benefit that ensures that seniors' caregivers taking care of seniors at home have some small respite for that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we've frozen the pharmacare premiums for seniors in their drug plans, and we've lowered the cost of generic drugs for seniors, Mr. Speaker. We have done in 3 short years more than that government did in the 10 years that they were in power, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The honourable member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Minister of Education stood up in this House when asked about teachers being cut from Tri-County Regional School Board and said that no teachers would be lost because this was attrition. Mr. Speaker, if a teacher retires and is not replaced, that is a position lost from the classroom. On Tuesday night, Tri-County Regional School Board was forced to eliminate 22 teaching positions because of this NDP government's $65 million in cuts to our education system, Mr. Speaker. Will the minister please tell this House how losing 22 positions out of the classroom doesn't affect the quality of our education for our kids in this province?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to share some statistics that over the last 3 years, the enrollment decline in Tri-County was 9.3, a significant drop in enrollment. We are investing appropriately for the services and the programs the students in Tri-County need. Thank you.
The honourable member for Yarmouth on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this minister doesn't know what the cost of educating our students with special needs is. She doesn't know what the fixed cost of our education system is. Yet she stands in this House and says because enrollment's declining, somehow that means that funding should decline as well. Mr. Speaker, and let's look at specifically what happened with the Tri-County Regional School Board. They had to cut a learning disability specialist and a school psychologist position, Mr. Speaker. It is the students who need the most support who are the most vulnerable to this government's cuts in our education system. Boards have raised concerns about the funding gap for students with special needs, Mr. Speaker. The minister seems to think it's okay to have less support for students with special needs or at-risk children because of declining enrollment. I think that's completely unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. Will the minister stand in this House and say that services for students with special needs are not affected when boards are forced to eliminate school psychologists and severe learning disability specialists?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for that question. School boards make decisions in the best interest of their students, and sometimes what we see on paper, we don't know the background information, so I'd like to share. The member mentioned one of the specialists. Actually, they felt that it was better to move that position into direct servicing. So they actually moved that position to resource in the schools because it better serves our students. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Yarmouth on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the school boards are forced to make decisions with the funding that they have. And this government can't continue to push off the responsibility on the school boards. This government has the money to invest in our education system, and they need to do it, Mr. Speaker. Nova Scotia has the second lowest per student funding in the country. Class sizes are growing. Students are losing supports under this government. The Tri-County Regional School Board had to cut supports for special needs and at-risk students to reach this minister's unrealistic and unfair budget targets. Nova Scotians are left to wonder how committed this minister is to the classroom and students with special needs if she allows these critical positions to be eliminated, Mr. Speaker. Will the minister stand in this House today and commit to restore the funding to public education so that boards aren't forced to cut supports for at-risk students and students with special needs?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We are investing in our students. We've increased our per-student funding. We have 361 more teachers teaching today than we did 10 years ago when there were 30,000 less students. We are making sure that we are providing the appropriate financing for each one of our boards across Nova Scotia. We are in a challenging time and we're rebalancing things, but I will ensure every member here that the investment that we are making in our students is meeting the needs of our students, and we're also strategically investing by adding extra programs with skills trades. We're making sure we have more school sites open. We're making sure that we're able to collect our data and reach the needs of our students through in-school. We are investing in our students, and the students in Tri-County have the appropriate investments so that they're all going to be successful. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Glace Bay.
You're lucky today, buddy. Mr. Speaker, on April 20th, the NDP announced funding for a new Cape Breton Strategic Framework Advancement Project. This was a $198,000 investment that will help map out a path for jobs and economic development growth in Cape Breton. I was proud to have been a part of the consultation process, which played a role in a formalized plan for cohesiveness among the various organizations and stakeholders involved. So my question to the Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism: was the Minister himself directly involved in this process, and if so, in what capacity?
The Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the world of economic and rural development and tourism, as with anything, I have appropriate staff that do the legwork, that are in the trenches. They come to me with to seek approval of how we advance things or how we don't advance things. So I am always involved at some degree with everything that goes through the department. And obviously, Mr. Speaker, I'm one person. I cannot be 100% involved in every little nook and cranny within the department. That's what we have staff for, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Glace Bay on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the reality is that this plan and the idea around this framework is to set the priorities in terms of what the development opportunities are in Cape Breton. So I certainly wouldn't consider a roadmap to get to lower unemployment, better workforce participation, bringing families home. I wouldn't consider that to be a nook and cranny part of the economic development. So I think it is important, and this is something the minister often uses stats and statistics when I ask him questions about Cape Breton, Mr. Speaker. So if he's going to use that kind of detail, I think that he would understand the importance of this strategic framework. Cape Breton is suffering under the weight of 16% unemployment, out-migration, and of course a shrinking labour force. Unlike the province's job creation strategy, the framework has set concrete goals and timelines. The framework sets out goals for employment growth, population growth, and labour market participation. So my question to the minister: does the minister agree with the targets set by the framework for employment, population, and labour force development?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the workforce strategy, is that we take a lot of things into account. We base some things on projections that we have to make some calculated estimates as to what the future is going to hold. We map out a strategy according to that. One of the things that we've done, which is, I know it's foreign to a lot of members on the opposite side of the House, is that we've developed plans, we developed strategies. They're not short-term, they are long-term strategies, Mr. Speaker. And you know what, I can appreciate when we talk about plans, I can appreciate that the lack of comprehension on the other side, because this is something new for them, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Glace Bay on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just to inform the minister, the framework looks to attain these following statistics: employment increase of 6%, population growth of 2% and labor force participation increase of 4%, which I think are very important statistics in terms of where this money and this investment is going to be utilized. In addition, the framework identifies target sectors for development, which obviously are those priorities for the island's economy and the best possible chances to create jobs, bring families home, and prop up our economic development initiatives. So the Minister's department last year spent $1.7 million on sector development. So the Minister just talked about how his department and his government are mapping out these strategies. Well, if you spend $2 million on a line called sector development, then obviously you're putting some kind of focus on what sectors are going to be important, as the framework is doing the same thing in Cape Breton. So my question to the Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism, what are the specific sectors the framework plans to target, and do these sectors align with the department's priorities as identified in this sector development process under ERDT?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, we have developed a strategy for all of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, and that strategy is very adaptable depending on where you are. Mr. Speaker, there are some things that are very, very sensitive, because I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, as you can understand, that we are in negotiations with some potential employers, not only just with Cape Breton, but also mainland Nova Scotia, that at this point in time, because of confidentiality, I'm not in a position to comment. Hopefully, in the weeks and in the months ahead, that we will have more announcements. And Mr. Speaker, we've already made some announcements, and we will continue to make those solid investments, not only in Cape Breton, Mr. Speaker, but all of Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Member for Argyll.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. Presently, lobster is selling for approximately $5 a pound in LFA 34. But you know what? The lobster fishers are very upset. They like to have at least $5.50. And now there's a strike. We talked about the 1688 Professional Lobster Fishers Association. Of course, that support is beginning to soften. Yesterday, in the minister's own constituency, close to his hometown, there was a bit of I would call it a little bit of a showdown, and the RCMP ended up being on scene. So there's a lot of things going on. So my question to the minister is, what role is he playing to try to get tempers and this issue to calm down just a little bit?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and to the member opposite. This is certainly a timely question at this time. I want to tell you what we are doing. And first of all, I can tell you within almost to the minute that all three parties, or the parties, are meeting as we speak in Southwest Nova Scotia. This is a very interesting issue that has to be dealt with. And I encourage the meetings to continue, and they've been going on for the last 72 hours and the following days. But I want to tell the member opposite what we have been doing, not only as a minister, but as a government, is that we are there standing up for independent fishers. We have improved the Fisheries Loan Board. We have put investments into the Lobster Council, who are going across the Atlantic provinces, and they're conducting a consultation process, and that information will be coming back at the end of this month. And we have moved jobs from Halifax to rural Nova Scotia. And I think, Mr. Speaker, that if Shelburne and Digby were goalposts, we just scored into an empty net. Mr. Speaker, all the above, this similar situation that the member from Argyll brings forward happened in 1991, and the members opposite could only wish that they did any of the above. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member for Argyll on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker.